Sergeant Elena Ramirez had always been the kind of soldier people underestimated. She wasn't the tallest in her unit, nor the loudest. She didn't bark orders or boast about her skills during downtime in the barracks. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet, deliberate confidence that sometimes made others uneasy. The men around her, especially the veterans, often assumed her silence meant weakness. What they didn't know was that she had spent years sharpening her edge, honing her marksmanship until it became something almost instinctive. Her reputation had already begun to spread across the base in Nevada, where soldiers trained beneath the unforgiving desert sun. Rumors traveled faster than bullets. Some said she could hit a coin tossed in the air from 200 yards. Others swore she had shot the head off a rattlesnake without even flinching. Whether the stories were true didn't matter. What mattered was that they stirred resentment. Soldiers who struggled with accuracy hated the idea of someone, especially someone like Elena, being naturally gifted. And then there was Major Whitaker. Whitaker was old school, forged in the fire of 3 tours overseas and hardened by a belief that soldiers were built through suffering, not talent. To him, modern, tools like high-powered scopes and advanced rifles were just crutches for the weak. He respected grit, not gadgets, and he certainly didn't respect Sergeant Ramirez, whose rise through the ranks had been fueled by her sharpshooting record. To him, she was just another soldier hiding behind glass. It was Whitaker's habit to pace the training yard at dawn, hands clasped behind his back, boots grinding into the dirt like the sound of judgment itself. Soldiers often stiffened when his gaze fell on them. But on this particular morning, his eyes landed squarely on Elena. She was cleaning her rifle, methodically wiping the barrel with a cloth as if she were polishing something sacred. Her sniper scope, gleaming under the desert light, sat neatly beside her. She wasn't showing off, wasn't even aware she was being watched. But to Whitaker it looked like dependence. "Ramirez," he barked, his voice carrying across the yard. Every head turned. Elena froze, then rose to attention, her rifle clutched in her hands. "Yes, sir." Whitaker's boots crunched closer. His weathered face carried a smirk, though his eyes were sharp as razors. He reached down, snatched the scope off the table, and held it up for everyone to see. "You're proud of this little toy, aren't you?" A ripple of laughter spread through the ranks. Elena felt heat creep into her cheeks, but her posture didn't break. She said nothing. Whitaker continued, his voice rising. "A soldier's worth isn't in a piece of glass, it's in grit, in discipline, in blood, sweat, and calluses." He turned the scope over in his hand like it was nothing more than a trinket. "Take this away, and what's left?" The soldiers around her exchanged smirks and whispers. Some leaned in, eager to see her stumble. Others looked uneasy, caught between loyalty to their sergeant and fear of the major's authority. Elena's chest tightened, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. "I'll tell you what's left," Whitaker growled. He tossed the scope into his palm with a clank. "A chance to prove yourself. You think you're a marksman? Fine. Do it the hard way. Iron sights, 20 rounds. 20 targets, no excuses." The yard grew deathly still. Even the desert wind seemed to pause. Elena's fingers tightened on her rifle. Doubt gnawed at the edges of her mind. But beneath it, something steadier stirred. She remembered her father's voice from long ago, teaching her how to aim with nothing but open sights. "Trust your eyes. Trust your heartbeat." She lifted her chin, her voice calm and clear. "Yes, sir." For a moment, Whitaker's smirk faltered. He had expected fear, hesitation, maybe even protest, but instead, Elena's quiet acceptance carried more weight than defiance. The challenge had been set, and the entire platoon now leaned forward, eager to witness it. In that instant, Elena Ramirez was no longer just another soldier cleaning her rifle. She was a mark waiting to be tested, a name waiting to be written in either failure or legend. And though no one could see it yet, the desert morning was about to host a battle not of bullets and blood, but of pride, precision, and unshakable will. The desert was a cruel teacher. By dawn, the air was already warm enough to sting the skin, and the ground radiated heat like a furnace waiting to be stoked. Soldiers shuffled into the training yard with weary eyes, rifles slung over their shoulders, boots scuffing against the sand. Some muttered complaints under their breath, others stood silently, conserving their energy for the grueling day ahead. The Nevada base was a place where weakness wasn't just exposed, it was punished. But that morning, something different hummed in the air, an invisible current that made even the seasoned veterans restless. Word had spread quickly. Major Whitaker had called out Sergeant Elena Ramirez. She was to prove herself with 20 rounds. No scope, no excuses. The soldiers gathered near the firing range, forming a loose semicircle around the line of steel targets glinting faintly in the morning sun. 20 of them stood at varying distances, some close enough to tempt overconfidence, others stretched. Out so far, they looked like tiny silver dots against the desert haze. Hitting all of them was difficult even with a scope. Without one, it bordered on impossible. Whitaker arrived with the kind of presence that made conversations die mid-sentence. His boots struck the earth in steady, deliberate rhythm, the brim of his cap shadowing eyes that had seen too much war to bother with kindness. In his hand, he still carried Elena's scope, swinging it casually as though it were a toy. He stopped in front of the platoon, letting silence settle before he spoke. "Discipline," he said, his voice low but cutting. "That's what separates soldiers from civilians. Out there." He jabbed a finger toward the horizon where mountains loomed faintly in the distance. "You don't always get the tools you want. Sometimes all you have is grit. Sometimes all you have is your training. And if that isn't enough." He let the words hang, unfinished, a shadow heavy enough to chill the air despite the rising sun. His gaze slid toward Elena. "Step forward, Sergeant." She obeyed without hesitation, boots crunching softly against the dirt. The soldiers' eyes followed her every move. Some smirked, convinced they were about to watch her stumble and finally confirm what they believed, that her reputation was exaggerated. Others held their breath, secretly hoping she would succeed, if only to prove Whitaker wrong. Elena stood at the firing line, rifle in her hands. She didn't glance at the major. She didn't look at the men watching. Instead, her focus narrowed on the line of targets stretching into the distance. A test. Nothing more. Nothing less. Whitaker placed himself at her side, arms crossed over his chest. "Iron sights only," he said, repeating the order, his tone dripping with condescension. He held the scope up for the platoon to see once more before tucking it under his arm like a trophy already won. 20 rounds, 20 targets, fail one and you prove my point." The yard fell silent again. Even the usual desert wind seemed to hold back, waiting. Elena crouched briefly, brushing a hand against the sand beneath her boots. The earth was already warm, gritty, unforgiving. She rose, squared her shoulders, and pulled the bolt on her rifle with a smooth, practiced motion. The metallic click echoed like a signal of defiance. From the sidelines, whispers rose. "She's gonna miss. No way she gets past 10. She won't last 5. But Elena's expression betrayed nothing. Her jaw was steady, her breathing even, her eyes fixed on the first target. She knew doubt would spread like wildfire if she let it in. She couldn't afford to hear their voices, couldn't afford to see Whitaker's smirk out of the corner of her eye. She inhaled slowly, feeling the dry desert air fill her lungs. In that breath, she was back in her childhood again. Crouched, in a field with her father's worn hunting rifle in her hands. No scope, no aid, just eyes, steel, and patience. He had taught her to trust herself more than the weapon. The rifle was only a tool. The soldier was the weapon. She exhaled, shoulders loosening. "Begin," Whitaker barked. The word cracked through the silence like a whip. Every soldier leaned forward. Elena pressed her cheek to the stock, sighting, through the iron notch. The world shrank into alignment. The desert, the target, the narrowing focus of her vision. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, not pulling, just waiting. She felt her heartbeat steady, slow, predictable. 1, 2 crack. The shot echoed across the yard, bouncing off steel and stone. Dust rose from the far end of the range. Every head snapped toward the target. A perfect bullseye. The silence that followed was heavier than any cheer. It wasn't supposed to happen. Not this easily. Not this perfectly. Whitaker's jaw tightened, but his face remained unreadable. And Elena? She simply chambered the next round, calm as the dawn itself. Elena's first shot still echoed faintly in the dry morning air, the smell of gunpowder hanging sharp in her nostrils. Soldiers shifted uneasily behind her, their earlier whispers strangled by disbelief. One bullseye could have been luck, but luck had never felt this deliberate. She didn't celebrate. She didn't even allow herself the luxury of relief. She knew the hardest battle wasn't against the targets. It was against the storm brewing inside her chest. Her father's voice came back to her, carried like smoke on the wind. Trust your eyes, trust your heartbeat. He had repeated it 100 times when she was a child crouched in the woods of New Mexico, his old hunting rifle balanced in her small hands. She had hated those first lessons, hated the weight of the rifle and the sting in her shoulder after each shot. But more than anything, she had hated the pressure, his unyielding gaze, his silence, and the way failure seemed to echo louder than success. That same silence now pressed in from all directions. Whitaker stood beside her like a wall of authority, arms crossed, his expression unreadable except for the faint curl of disdain tugging at his lips. He wanted her to falter. He wanted her to feel the sting of humiliation in front of everyone, and in a way he was succeeding. Elena's heart thumped harder. She slid another round into the chamber, the metallic click sounding far too loud in the desert stillness. For a split second, doubt crept in. What if the first bullseye had been a fluke? What if her nerves betrayed her now? What if the whispers about her, that she was all talk, all scope, were true? She inhaled, trying to push the thoughts away. The weight of every soldier's stare pressed against her back. Failure wasn't just personal here. It would stain her reputation, undo everything she had worked for. Focus. She dropped her cheek to the stock, eyes aligning with the next target. This one was farther out, shimmering faintly in the heat waves rising from the sand. Without a scope, it felt impossibly small. The iron notch wavered as her breathing caught in her throat. She forced herself to still, counting the beat of her pulse. 1, 2, 3. Crack. The target rang clean with impact, the metallic ping carrying like a bell of defiance. Another bullseye. Gasps rippled through the crowd, hushed and disbelieving. Some soldiers muttered curses under their breath. Others shook their heads, jaws slack. Whitaker's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. Elena pulled away from the sight, exhaled slowly and reloaded. Her hands were steady, but inside her chest, the war raged. Each perfect shot only raised the stakes. Each success piled more weight onto the mountain of expectation. A single miss would undo the momentum, confirm to every onlooker that she had been riding luck all along. She closed her eyes briefly, just long enough to feel the heat of the sun on her face. She remembered her father again, but this time the memory softened. He had been harsh, yes, but beneath it all was something else. Pride. Pride that his daughter had learned to do what even seasoned hunters struggled with. Pride that she had trusted herself when others doubted her. Her lips curved faintly, invisible to those watching. She wasn't here for Whitaker's approval. She wasn't here for the whispers of her fellow soldiers. She was here for that younger version of herself, crouched in the dirt, fighting through frustration until instinct took over. She opened her eyes. The next target waited. Another breath, another shot. Crack. The steel rang again. Bullseye. The crowd erupted in murmurs now, the disbelief growing louder. 10 soldiers leaned forward. Others exchanged incredulous glances. A few even allowed themselves the beginnings of awe. Whitaker didn't move, but Elena could feel the heat of his glare beside her. The major's silence was heavier than words, heavier than the desert air itself. She chambered another round, steady as stone, though inside the doubt still clawed. How long could she keep this streak alive? Would her nerves betray her on the 15th shot? The 18th? The 20th? Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, but her breathing stayed calm. She had learned long ago that doubt didn't have to be erased. It had to be mastered. Doubt was the weight that made the soldier stronger if carried right. And so she carried, it shouldering both rifle and fear alike, as the desert morning stretched toward destiny. The sun had fully risen now, painting the Nevada sky in burning streaks of gold and pale blue. Heat shimmered above the sand, bending the distant horizon like a mirage. For most soldiers, that wavering distortion made the targets even harder to hit. For Elena, it was simply another obstacle, one she had trained her mind to ignore. She inhaled, pressed her cheek to the stock again, and fixed her eye down the iron sights. Her target was farther now, maybe 200 yards, gleaming faintly under the sun's glare. Without a scope, the steel plate looked no larger than the nail of her thumb. She focused anyway, letting her vision sharpen, narrowing everything else into silence. Her finger rested against the trigger, but she didn't squeeze. She waited. That was the secret most never learned, the patience to let the shot come to you, not the other way around. The whisper of the wind, the thud of her heartbeat, the pause in her breath. She counted them like the ticks of an invisible clock. Crack. The rifle kicked into her shoulder. The steel plate chimed with a perfect ring. Gasps spread across the yard. A few soldiers clapped hands over their mouths in disbelief. Whitaker's eyes, sharp as glass, flicked toward the target, then back to Elena. He said nothing, but his smirk had faltered slightly. Elena didn't glance his way. She slid the next round into the chamber, the metallic click punctuating the heavy silence. Sweat began to roll down her back beneath her fatigues, but her hands were steady. She raised the rifle again, sighted the next target, farther still. Her mind drifted briefly to her first time firing without guidance, back when she was 15. Her father had set up soda cans on a fence post at impossible distances, grinning in his quiet, stern way. She had hated him for it at the time, hated how impossible he made things seem. But when she hit the first can and heard his rare, brief laugh, she realized he hadn't been trying to discourage her. He had been teaching her to find strength in the impossible. Now, here she was again, proving it wasn't impossible at all. Crack. Another bullseye. The soldiers erupted in whispers. "That's two," one hissed. "No way!" Elena loaded again, unfazed. The desert seemed to narrow into a tunnel, the crowd fading to shadows at the edge of her vision. All that mattered was the next target, the next breath, the next beat of her pulse. Crack, 3, crack, 4. The shots rang in rhythm, each one followed by the metallic confirmation of success. With each hit, the crowd grew quieter. Whispers faded into silence, replaced by the kind of stillness that comes only when disbelief turns into awe. By her fifth shot, the silence was absolute. No mutters, no snickers. Just a stunned, heavy quiet that even the desert wind dared not disturb. Whitaker shifted his stance, crossing his arms tighter over his chest. The veins in his jaw stood out as he clenched it, watching the impossible unfold before him. Elena pulled away from the sights for a brief moment, exhaling slowly. She didn't allow herself to smile. She couldn't. Not yet. 5 hits weren't enough. Not with 15 more to go. A single miss could unravel everything. Still, her chest carried the faint burn of pride, buried beneath layers of discipline. She reloaded, her motions smooth, almost mechanical. Her fingers danced across the rifle like a pianist over ivory keys, each movement deliberate and unhurried. The 6th target waited. She steadied herself again, blocking out the weight of dozens of eyes on her. Crack. Bullseye. This time, no one spoke. The silence was its own thunder, louder than cheers could ever be. Elena lowered the rifle, letting herself breathe, but she felt the growing storm within her chest. Success was a double-edged blade. Every perfect shot made the next one heavier, the pressure sharper. If she faltered now, all this would collapse in on itself. Her father's words echoed once more, steadying her. Trust your eyes. Trust your heartbeat. She chambered the 7th round. The targets shimmered in the heat, but her vision never wavered. She was locked in, steady, unshakable. Crack. 7 for 7. And in that moment, for the first time, even Whitaker's confidence flickered. By the 7th shot, the desert was no longer just hot. It was suffocating. The rising sun pressed down on the training yard like a weight, and the heat shimmered off the sand in waves. Sweat trickled beneath Elena's fatigues, soaking the collar of her undershirt, but her grip on the rifle never faltered. 7 shots, 7 bullseyes. The platoon had grown unnervingly quiet, every soldier fixed on her as though hypnotized. At first they had expected a stumble, a miss that would validate every smirk and whispered doubt. But with each perfect strike, the silence stretched longer, heavier, shifting from curiosity into disbelief. Whitaker stood at her side, his boots dug into the dirt, arms crossed tight across his chest. His jaw clenched hard enough that the muscles in his face twitched. He hadn't expected her to get this far. His test, what was supposed to expose her weakness, was becoming something else entirely. Elena chambered the 8th round. The metallic click echoed louder than it should have, a punctuation mark in the desert stillness. She lifted the rifle, aligned the sights, and let her breath fall into rhythm. Crack. The steel plate rang clean. Bullseye. This time the soldiers couldn't keep silent. A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. 8? One muttered. She hasn't missed once. No way she keeps this up. Elena ignored them all. She reloaded again, her movements smooth, controlled, betraying nothing of the storm inside her chest. Her heartbeat was pounding now, not just from the physical strain but from the crushing pressure building with every perfect shot. 9, 10, 2 more flawless strikes. The platoon's whispers grew louder, their disbelief spilling into awe. Elena lowered the rifle briefly, exhaling hard, letting her shoulders roll back. Her arms ached, her body slick with sweat, but her mind was sharper than it had ever been. Each successful shot was fuel and burden all at once. Every hit made her stronger, yet every success raised the stakes. Whitaker shifted slightly, the sand crunching under his heel. His silence was its own performance, meant to project control, but the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth betrayed him. Elena chambered the 11th round. She paused a moment longer this time, aware of the danger of letting fatigue and expectation creep in. Her father's voice came to her again. Trust your eyes. Trust your heartbeat. She lined up, inhaled, and fired. Crack. The steel sang. Bullseye. Gasps erupted now, louder and less restrained. Some soldiers shook their heads, muttering, "Unbelievable," while others leaned forward as if being pulled by an unseen magnet. The energy in the yard was shifting. What had begun as a test was turning into a spectacle. Elena chambered the 12th round. This time, Whitaker leaned slightly closer, his voice low, sharp enough for only her to hear. Careful, Ramirez. Pressure breaks more soldiers than bullets ever will. She didn't answer. She let his words hang in the air, unacknowledged, and steadied her sights again. Crack. 12. The platoon buzzed now, unable to contain themselves. Some grinned, despite themselves. Others muttered curses under their breath. But no one doubted anymore, no one except Whitaker. His smirk was gone, his jaw tight, his authority fraying with every shot she landed. Elena lowered her rifle again, taking a long breath. Her body was trembling now, not from fear, but from the sheer pressure of perfection. 12 shots down. 8 to go. The higher she climbed, the harder the fall would be. But she wasn't shooting to prove Whitaker wrong anymore. She was shooting to prove herself right, to that younger girl who had once doubted she belonged. The tension was unbearable. The desert itself seemed to lean in, waiting. Elena chambered the 13th round. The range was silent again. Every soldier held their breath. Even Whitaker's composure cracked, his eyes narrowing as if trying to pierce her focus. She steadied, her breath, eyes locked on the target, and fired. 13. The steel plate chimed with a sharp metallic note, echoing back across the training yard. Soldiers broke into gasps, some shaking their heads, others muttering under their breath like men watching something unnatural unfold. By now, the whispers had shifted tone. They no longer carried doubt or ridicule. They carried awe. 13, someone whispered, almost reverent. Elena Ramirez didn't allow herself to react. She lowered the rifle, rolled her shoulders back, and chambered the next round with the same calm precision she had since the first. But inside, her pulse hammered like a drumbeat. The further she went, the heavier the burden became. She wasn't just defying odds anymore, she was defying belief itself. Whitaker shifted his stance. His boots ground into the sand as he adjusted, arms still crossed but tighter now, shoulders rigid. His silence no longer carried confidence. It carried tension. The soldiers noticed. They stole glances at their major, the man who had thrown down this challenge with smug certainty, and for the first time they saw cracks in his armor. Elena raised her rifle again. The 14th target gleamed far down range, shimmering in the heat. Her breath was shallow now, her muscles aching from the weight of holding her weapon steady so long. Every trigger pull drained her, but she welcomed the burn. Pain meant she was alive. Pain meant she was still in control. She steadied, inhaled, exhaled. Crack, 14. This time the platoon couldn't help themselves. Cheers erupted, restrained at first, then louder as disbelief gave way to pride. Some soldiers clapped each other on the shoulders. Some cursed in amazement, but all of them were caught in the gravity of her performance. Whitaker's jaw tightened. Silence, he barked, his voice slicing through the air. The cheers died instantly, but the electricity lingered, buzzing beneath the surface. Elena didn't look at him. She chambered the 15th round. By now, her breathing was ragged, sweat streaking her face, dust sticking to her skin. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, steadying herself, reaching back into memory. She was 10 years old again, lying in the dirt with her father's rifle, the world heavy on her small shoulders. She had missed a shot that day, tears burning her eyes, but her father had only said one thing. You'll learn. A soldier isn't measured by one bullet. She's measured by whether she keeps firing. That memory wrapped around her like armor. She opened her eyes, sighted the target, and squeezed the trigger. Crack, 15. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Even though Whitaker had silenced them before, the roar slipped out. Low whistles, muttered exclamations, the sound of boots, stamping in disbelief. Some of the men who had doubted her most now leaned forward eagerly, their skepticism replaced by admiration. Elena allowed herself the faintest smile, barely visible, then pressed it back down. Pride was dangerous. Pride could make her sloppy. She reloaded again, chambering the 16th round with mechanical precision. Whitaker spoke then, low and cutting. You think this makes you a soldier, Ramirez? It doesn't. This is a circus. Trick, nothing more. Elena didn't answer. She didn't need to. The targets would speak for her. She steadied the rifle, lined her sights, and fired. Crack, 16. The steel rang. The soldiers erupted again, this time louder. The sound rolled across the yard like thunder, uncontainable. Whitaker's face darkened, but he couldn't stop it. The platoon was no longer watching for her to fail. They were watching for her to finish. They were rooting for her now, even against their major. 17. 18. Each shot drove the tension higher. Each bullseye tore down the wall of doubt Whitaker had built around her reputation. By the 18th shot, the energy was feverish. Soldiers clenched fists, muttering prayers, eyes wide. Whitaker said nothing now. He simply stared, his authority shrinking with every perfect strike. Elena's arms trembled, exhaustion gnawing at her, but her eyes never wavered. She was past doubt, past fear. She was in the flow now, every shot an extension of instinct, every breath a countdown. 19. The target fell clean, the plate ringing like a bell announcing victory. The yard exploded with noise, cheers, shouts, laughter born of disbelief. Even the desert seemed to vibrate with the sound. One shot remained. Elena lowered her rifle, chest heaving, and closed her eyes. She wasn't shooting against Whitaker anymore. She wasn't shooting for the platoon. She was shooting for herself, for every doubt she had carried, every sneer she had endured, every whispered insult about her worth. She chambered the 20th round. The steel target shimmered in the distance like destiny itself. The yard fell silent again. Even the desert wind stilled as if holding its breath. Elena pressed her cheek to the stock, aligned the sights, and let the world fall away. It all came down to this. 19 perfect shots. The training yard was no longer a place of drills or discipline. It was an arena. Every soldier holding their breath as though the desert itself had stilled to witness history. Dust hung in the air, suspended, caught between the heat and the silence. Elena Ramirez stood at the center, rifle in hand, sweat dripping into the dirt at her boots. Her chest rose and fell in sharp, deliberate breaths. Only one target remained. The 20th plate sat farther than the others, a dull shimmer at the edge of the range. It seemed smaller than it was, warped by the heat waves rising from the desert floor. From this distance, it wasn't just a target. It was a question. Could she finish what she had started? Could she close the circle without faltering? Whitaker's silence was thunderous. His arms were still crossed, his jaw still set, but the certainty that had once clung to him was gone. His test, meant to break her, had instead broken him. Around them, the platoon no longer tried to hide their awe. Men who had scoffed at her that morning now leaned forward, hungry for the final shot. Some whispered prayers, some clenched fists. Others simply watched, wide-eyed, unwilling to blink in case they missed it. Elena chambered the last round. The click of the bolt carried across the yard like the toll of a bell. She raised the rifle, her muscles trembling from fatigue, her hands slick with sweat. The stock pressed into her shoulder like it was part of her, familiar and grounding. She closed one eye, lined up her sights, and let her focus narrow until nothing existed except her heartbeat and the steel plate in the distance. Thump, 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 thump. Her pulse was too loud, too fast. She exhaled slowly, trying to find the rhythm again. She had done this 19 times already, each shot precise, each breath measured. But this wasn't just another bullet. This was the bullet. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, calm and steady. A soldier doesn't chase perfection, Elena. She chases persistence. One more shot. Always one more shot. She inhaled, let the air fill her lungs, then released it slowly. Every fraction of a second stretched to eternity. And then... Ramirez, Whitaker said suddenly, his voice low but sharp, slicing into her concentration like a blade. Even if you make this shot, you'll always be the soldier who needed a circus act to prove herself. The words hit her like a strike. Her finger hesitated on the trigger. For the first time, doubt cracked her armor. Her eye twitched off the target. The plate blurred. Around her, the platoon shifted uncomfortably, some glaring at Whitaker, others muttering under their breath. But no one dared speak. Elena steadied herself again, jaw tightening. She couldn't let him take this from her. Not now. Not at the final step. She inhaled deeply, forcing the air down, forcing her heart to slow. She shut out his voice, shut out the crowd, shut out everything but the steel plate waiting for her. The desert went silent. She pulled the trigger. Crack. The sound echoed like thunder, the recoil jolting her shoulder. For a breathless moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Even the wind seemed frozen. Then, ping. The steel plate rang, clear, a perfect center hit. The yard erupted. Soldiers shouted, clapped, cheered, some throwing helmets into the air. Laughter and disbelief tangled together, the sound rolling across the desert like a wave. Men who had doubted her were shouting her name now, some pounding each other on the back, others just staring, dumbstruck. 19 shots had been miraculous. 20 was legend. Elena lowered her rifle slowly, her arms trembling with exhaustion, her breath coming in ragged gulps. She looked out across the range, across the cheering platoon and let the noise wash over her. For the first time since stepping onto the line, she allowed herself to smile, not wide, not boastful, but quiet and unshakable. Whitaker stood rigid, his face unreadable. For a moment his eyes met hers. There was no smugness left, no cruel smirk, just silence. And though he said nothing, Elena saw it clearly, the respect he would never speak aloud. She had turned his test into her triumph. The impossible had become undeniable. The steel plate's echo still lingered in the desert air when the cheering reached its peak. The platoon had turned into a storm of voices, boots stomping against the dirt, hands clapping, helmets tossed, skyward in a frenzy. Soldiers who had laughed at Elena hours earlier now shouted her name with grins stretched across their faces. For them, this wasn't just about marksmanship anymore. It was about witnessing something they could tell and retell for years, the day one soldier defied expectation and made 20 perfect shots. Elena Ramirez lowered her rifle, arms trembling from exhaustion, but her posture remained steady. Her chest rose and fell with deep, ragged breaths, her body demanding rest. Yet in her eyes there was no fatigue, only the quiet fire of someone who had just rewritten her own story. Across the yard, Whitaker stood motionless. The noise swirled around him, but he was still, his face a mask of control. The major had been certain this test would expose her limits, reveal cracks in her confidence. Instead, it had unraveled him, stripped away the shield of authority he had wielded so effortlessly. For the first time, he wasn't the man commanding the story. Elena was. He stepped forward, his boots crunching over the dirt. The cheering dimmed slightly, the platoon sensing the tension as he approached her. Elena braced herself, meeting his gaze head-on. She expected words, sharp, dismissive, a final attempt to reclaim dominance. But Whitaker didn't speak right away. He studied her, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. For the briefest moment, his expression softened, though he quickly buried it beneath his usual severity. When he finally spoke, his voice was even, carrying over the lingering cheers. 20 perfect shots, he said. No soldier I've commanded has ever done that. The platoon stirred at his words, glancing between them, sensing something, shifting. Whitaker paused as if wrestling with himself, then added, "You proved yourself today, Ramirez. Not to me, to them, and maybe, to yourself." He didn't smile. He didn't congratulate her outright. But the meaning was there, tucked between the words. It was as close to respect as Whitaker would ever give. Then he turned sharply, signaling the end of the test, and walked away, leaving the yard buzzing in his wake. The platoon rushed forward, surrounding Elena with cheers and pats on the back. Some laughed, some cursed in disbelief, others simply shook their heads in awe. A tall sergeant clapped her on the shoulder, grinning wide. "Damn, Ramirez, you made history today." "Legendary," another added. "Nobody's gonna forget this." Elena smiled faintly, the exhaustion catching up to her now. But inside, she wasn't basking in their praise. She was remembering the doubt, the sneers, the smirks, the countless whispers that she wasn't ready, wasn't good enough. All of it had led here. And now, those whispers had been silenced by the ringing of steel targets. Later, when the yard had cleared and the sun dipped lower on the horizon, Elena sat alone with her rifle resting across her lap. She cleaned it carefully, her hands steady despite the ache in her arms. Each stroke of the cloth across the barrel felt like a ritual, a way of sealing the moment into memory. She thought of her father, of the first time she had held a rifle with trembling hands, of the missed shot that had left her in tears. He had told her persistence was the mark of a soldier. Today, persistence had carried her through every doubt, every challenge. The range was quiet now, but she could still hear it, the echo of 20 shots ringing out like a drumbeat across her life. Each one had been more than a bullet. Each one had been a statement, a step toward the soldier she was becoming. She, Rose, slung the rifle across her back and walked toward the barracks. Tomorrow the work would continue. Tomorrow she would face new challenges, new doubts, new battles. But she carried something now that couldn't be stripped away by words, by sneers, or even by the Major himself. She carried proof. Proof that when the test came, she had stood her ground. Proof that she was not defined by doubt, but by the shots she refused to miss. In the fading desert light, Elena Ramirez walked with her head high, every step a promise to herself. She had turned the tables. She had written her story, and it was only the beginning.